So,
I give you Janette, who's going to present a slideshow first, and then we'll have questions. Take it away, Janette.
thank you, Roberta. Okay, well, it is great to be here with all of you. And I wanted to start today with a question. What is the greatest city in the world, with the exception of your hometown? So just think about it for a moment. Think about, what do I think is the greatest city in the world? So when I ask this question, many of the same cities come up. People talk about London and Paris and Rome. And if you Google many cities, you get a skyline shot like this. But, you know, we don't experience cities at this altitude. We experience cities at the street level. And great cities may be big, but even the biggest cities are made up of small places. That's where the people are, and that's where life happens. Churchill once said that we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us. And the same goes for the city itself. We shape our streets and then our streets shape us. They're what makes cities great or not so great. And life isn't lived at the penthouse level in New York City. It's lived on the ground. And the reality is that the life on our streets don't always live up to our love of our cities. And if you've ever been to Paris, you've seen the disconnect between the ideal that people love and the reality on the street that people loathe, between how we revere our history and how little regard our cities sometimes show to those who live there today. And while the monuments bless residents and visitors in Rio, those visitors and blessings don't extend to many streets. In a lot of places, if you're not in your car, you're on your own. And it's not that we don't know how to make great streets. It's that we've spent most of the last century doing something else. We built our city streets around the new mobility technology, the automobile. Streets used to be shared. People walked and biked. There were carriages and streetcars. This is Mulberry Street 100 years ago. And this is Mulberry Street today. Most of it's been taken over by cars and parking and traffic signals, to the point by little, and then all at once, we lost the plot and we lost the street. And then Jane Jacobs came on the scene, and she inspired generations of planners around the world to design cities for people, not just cars. And she saw the city through fresh eyes and gave us a new language for streets as the essential elements of cities, inspiring a course correction that stopped the building of new highways in Manhattan. But if you look at a lot of our streets, we haven't delivered on Jane's promise as much as Jane or any of us would have liked. This is Washington Square Park around 1960 when Jane wrote her book. And you can see that cars had plenty of room, but even then there was room for people. And this is the same spot 60 years later, still overrun by cars, in a place where people are given almost none of the space, though they are 90% of the traffic. There isn't a single reason that explains why all of this happened. It's more of a, cast of the usual suspects that are lined up here. You know some of them: planners who separated businesses and commercial and residential neighborhoods so that you have to drive everywhere, zoning that required new parking with every new building, turning many downtowns into vast parking lots where buildings should be. And after a while, you kind of forget it can be any other way, because we change our streets and then our streets change us. And seen through a windshield, a good city street is clear of obstacles and preferably free of people. We've stopped seeing streets as places to be and started to see them as a way to get somewhere else. And a lot of streets in the United States and around the world are the result of this dashboard view. And I was thinking there should be a name for this approach. So came up with mansplaining, what you get when you design cities for cars and in the process turn them into places you wouldn't want to be unless you were in one. And after a century of building roads and installing traffic signals and lights and lanes, you'd think our streets would be safe and traffic free. But this is the result: deadly, costly, congested, inequitable streets with 1.35 million people dying every year on roads around the world. It's the equivalent of 9 747s crashing every day for a year. And instead of stepping up, we simply lowered our expectations and learned to live with it. Traffic deaths are now the #1 killer of young people ages 5 to 29. And instead of fixing the street, we teach children to fear and avoid it. And a lot of cities have just given up and asked people to wave these high vis flags. And this isn't a solution. It's a flag of surrender. Many of you probably know this man and probably know this quip, that building more roads to prevent congestion is like loosening your belt to prevent obesity. He said it in 1955 when the US first started building interstate highways. And we've spent the last 75 years loosening that belt more and more. But that didn't solve the problem. It just led to more cars and more congestion while cutting off communities from one another. Imagine if we brought that approach of traffic engineering to any other field, like computer technology. You know, there was a time when basic computers took up the entire floor of office buildings. Computer engineers didn't innovate by building bigger mainframes. They innovated by making processors much smaller, yet a lot faster and far less expensive. And you can imagine if we applied that design principle to our streets, like here on First Avenue, updating them, voila, with bike lanes and bus lanes and pedestrian safety islands. And in New York City, the closest thing we had to an update button was Mayor Bloomberg's Plan YC, his sustainability blueprint. And it laid out strategies and programs on transportation and housing, land use and energy, so that when we walk out our front doors in 20 years, it was a greater, greener New York City that worked better for everyone. And it was about not just bringing our infrastructure into a state of good repair, but designing it for all the uses that we want to see in 10 and 20 years. And changing the hardware is the first and often the hardest part of changing our cities. When I became transportation commissioner in 2007, there were actually no goals for walking, no goals for biking and transit, no goals for reducing traffic deaths or improving the livability of streets. There was no strategic plan for our 6,000 miles of streets. And people said it was impossible to change New York because New York was New York. And we don't bike, and we look at buses as a punchline. But we saw opportunities to take streets and reclaim them and redesign them in real time. And it doesn't take billions of dollars or years of construction. You can use the paint and the materials that you have on hand. And we made transformations like these all across the city, seeing the hidden life between the lanes, like here in Brooklyn, and opening up the street to pedestrians and the streets to storefronts and making it better for business and better for residents. And by following the people, you can see where they are at risk. This is the infamous Queens Boulevard, which used to be known as the Boulevard of Death. And you can see it's just this raceway with no space at all for people. And so we changed this boulevard of death. And after these changes, we recorded the first year without a single death on Queens Boulevard. You can just see what's needed on the street by watching people like here in Brooklyn and creating safe streets and safe spaces for the community out of those roadway lanes, turning parking spaces in front of schools into streets that are actually extensions of the schools and classrooms themselves. And we brought a similar approach to buses, taking congested corridors like this one on Webster Avenue in the Bronx and turning it into a rapid bus route with dedicated camera enforced lanes, traffic signals that gave buses the priority and let people pay before they got on the bus. And perhaps it wasn't a surprise that after we did this, buses were 25% faster, 25% increase in ridership, which made life much easier for the 250,000 daily riders on this corridor. And it's important because transit isn't just about getting from place to place, it's an investment in people and the future of cities. Although, as you can see, some people don't see it that way. Elon Musk said, transit is a pain in the ass and filled with potential serial killers, which is why people want to drive their own cars. Now, it's true that I have seen things on transit that I can't unsee. And everybody takes transit, and I mean everybody. And, that's one of the great things about it. You share a space with fellow travelers and, you share the rhythm of the city. But if you are worried about killers on transit, let me tell you about a transportation pathology known as road rage. You probably know that the shortest interval of time ever recorded is the nanosecond between a New York City traffic light turning green and the person behind you honking the horn. Fortunately, New York City is doubling down on its transit future, with 20 routes in place or in progress, making the commutes better for 600,000 passengers a day without having to build a single tunnel. And changing direction isn't just a matter of turning your back on cars. You have to create something better. And bikes are a key part of that equation. People used to say, you were crazy to bike in New York. And the only ones that did it were delivery men or maniacs. And yet the majority of trips in New York City are under 2 miles. This is 9th Avenue in 2007. And this is after the first parking protected lane in the United States that we built. We changed the pieces of the street and pushed the bike lane against the curb and pushed the cars into the adjacent lane to protect the cyclists. And we added pedestrian islands for safer and easier crossings, especially for our vulnerable pedestrians, our young kids and older citizens. And this created a better street for everyone, including the local businesses that now had new dedicated space for deliveries. And with this new network, ridership tripled in New York City, and we had the safest streets in 100 years. And these type of designs became standard practice across the country, helping us catch up with designs that have taken off all across the world. And safe infrastructure is really the bedrock of a safe biking culture. And these new lanes supported the launch of City Bike, which is the largest system in North America and is now being expanded under a third New York City mayor. And you can see Mayor Adams looking very dapper on his City Bike, taken about a month ago. And City Bike is expanding from 6,000 bikes in dark blue to 40,000 in the rest of the blue that you see here on the map. People have taken 150 million rides since launch. That's the equivalent of 300 trips to the moon and back. It's been an incredible success story. But probably the biggest showcase of our change-based approach was Times Square. And many of you on this webinar have probably seen it in person in travels. This was Times Square in 2008. It was this Gordian knot of traffic, and people had tried for years to fix it, changing the traffic signals, changing the slip lanes, and nothing worked. And that's because, as many of you know, Broadway cuts on a diagonal through the street grid of Manhattan, and it creates wonderful three-way places, you know, the intersections you see at Times Square, at Madison Square, and 34th Street. But it also created this traffic chaos. And so we looked to say, what if we took a bigger picture look at it? What if we restored Broadway to the grid and put it back and created that space for people? So let's close Broadway to cars and open it to people. So we brought this idea to Mike Bloomberg, and it was the middle of his re-election campaign, actually. And let's just say that the senior advisors around him weren't that crazy about it. But he went around the room, and after everybody expressed their concern, he turned to me and he said, you know, I don't ask my commissioners to do the right thing according to the political calendar. I ask my commissioners to do the right thing, period. And he shook my hand and he said, let's do it. So we tried it as a pilot, and we measured it to see if it worked. If it worked, we'd keep it. If it didn't work, we'd put it back to the way that it was. And we put out these traffic cones and barrels. And at the last minute, we bought these beach chairs from Pinchick hardware store in Brooklyn because we'd actually forgotten to put anything out there. And this was our last minute, move to try to do something about it. And people loved the chairs. And they loved the fact that they could sit down and take in all the grandeur of Times Square. And not surprisingly, it turned into one of the world's top retail locations because cars don't shop, people do. And since then, 125,000 more people walk through Times Square since we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the project and completed its capital reconstruction. But changing the street turned out to be the easy part. Changing the minds of New Yorkers was where the fireworks came in. And we were changing the way people experienced their city. And let's just say that not everyone liked what they saw. They said, we couldn't have safer streets for bikes because we're not Amsterdam. Or others said, we're not Copenhagen. And all sorts of people weighed in. And there were some politicians that were running for mayor that thought that running against bike lanes would be good politics. And we all know how that turned out. And data played a really key role in helping us overcome criticism. And we changed the way that we measured our projects, looking beyond travel time impacts, how fast cars were going before and after, to see what the impact was on local businesses and on everyone else using a street. And this type of analysis actually changed the narrative and changed the headlines. And probably our biggest reframing was around safety. We did the largest traffic study of any big city ever. And we looked at the who, the what, and the why, and the when of traffic crashes. And we used the findings from this report as a roadmap for implementing our safety projects. And this data gave us a new way to reframe our roadway redesigns. And it actually put safety on the front page of the New York Times for the first time. But beyond all the headlines, we had public support. At the end of the Bloomberg administration, 73% of New Yorkers supported bike share, 72% supported the plazas, 64% of New Yorkers supported bike lanes. People were way ahead of the press and the politicians when it came to supporting better streets. And this finding has proven true around the world. Bikeable, walkable streets are not just good policy, they're good politics. And where mayors have implemented ambitious bike lane and pedestrian plans, they have been consistently reelected. My colleague Seth Solomano and I wrote an article on this in The Guardian, and I encourage you to check it out. But what we saw was that whether in New York or Detroit or London or Paris or Milan or Tel Aviv or Sydney, they won. And these types of changes are increasingly the indicators of a world-class city. And people are really the unsung heroes in this story. You know, administrations, city administrations come and go, but when a culture changes, it's the people that are the human infrastructure that propel it and that carry the message forward. And in 2020, streets across the United States became sites for racial justice protests. And they're the focus of efforts to achieve an equitable and sustainable recovery. Streets like these were reimagined during the lockdown as places for art and community gathering. And these are a few of the 45 asphalt art projects that were funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. And these examples show that we're not limited by the status quo on our streets. We're only limited by our vision of what they can be used for. Now, I've talked a little bit about the hardware of the street and the importance of citizen infrastructure. So I want to talk about software and the software of the street. And redesigned roads can really only do so much if they're running on the same old program. And we're now faced with this prospect of driverless cars taking over the responsibility of driving. And, you know, there's a lot to like in theory. You know, human behavior is a factor in a lot of traffic crashes, speeding, inattention, and drunk driving. And seen this way, we shouldn't be afraid of driverless cars. We should be afraid of the cars that we already have. If we can connect vehicles with the worldwide street, we can avoid many of the 40,000 annual traffic deaths in the United States and reduce the need for street parking. You may not even need to own one. You could just use an app to summon one on demand. At least that's how the story goes. And it's filled with a lot of ifs. And there are a lot of big gaps on what driverless mobility could mean. And it's really interesting, you know, when you Google autonomous vehicles, you get hundreds of images where the only people you see are people chilling in cars. And it looks like if you get driverless cars, you also get peopleless streets with maybe a token Photoshop kid, you know, there in the corner, I guess, playing soccer by himself. And if this scene looks vaguely familiar, it's because we've already seen this movie. This was the Technicolor fantasy of the 20th century. People sipping coffees in automatic cars, wearing these kind of Logan's Run turtleneck sweaters. And today, the fantasy is still automatic cars and turtlenecks. And I just want, what is with these turtlenecks? You know, although this, you know, modern version has more of a kind of Xanax and chill vibe to it. But this driverless fantasy is a fugue state, and we can't be so busy daydreaming that we don't realize we are driving into the same dead end as the last century. And driverless cars will only be as safe and as efficient as people program them to be. And for 100 years, when you think about it, we've had the power to manufacture cars that are incapable of speeding or regulating the speeding they can do. But limited cars have not been invented yet. They don't exist. But what does exist are Teslas with a so-called autopilot mode that lets you toggle between chill and assertive modes that allow you to roll through stop signs. We need to make sure that technology is put into the service of cities and not the other way around. And to be honest, turtlenecks are a dead giveaway. I just think we should get rid of this whole genre. The point is that technology can create a cool product, but it cannot create a city worth living in. Because a driverless car is still a car, and a car occupies a big footprint on the street. And it has the same footprint, whether it's a regular car, an Uber or Lyft, a driverless car, or an electric car. Cars consume space and not just energy. And the point of driverless mobility isn't to have better cars, but to have better cities. You can build all the high-tech cars in the world, but still not be able to cross the street or have destinations worth walking to or cities worth walking in. You're just running new software on old hardware. And we can't be so busy looking at this new technology, Musk saying, oh, yes, we're going to have new tunnels. And, they're basically nothing new except maybe LED lit tunnels. We can't be so busy checking out the future of mobility that we turn our back on the proven street design fundamentals that actually make our city great. Street design actually turned out to be one of the most important resources that cities had during the pandemic. And in New York City, we went from a Times Square that was the crossroads of the world to the epicenter of the pandemic almost overnight. And this scene played out around the world, from London to Barcelona to Milan, San Francisco, Chicago. Check out the coyote roaming the streets of Chicago. But in other ways, cities never shut down. And in New York, essential workers still needed to reach jobs, and 1.7 million people still rode the subway every day. People needed to shop to get food and supplies and to get out for fresh air and for exercise. And as quickly as some cities shut down, the first thing that many of them did was to reopen their streets. New York City created 67 miles of shared streets and certified over 10,000 restaurants for outdoor dining, taking over 15,000 parking spaces. And this is a playbook that more than 50 US cities adopted last year to keep businesses and city life alive. And bike lanes were also a first-line response in cities around the world, and they actually provided a critical alternative to public transit and driving. And it spurned a real bike boom. And e-bikes are now outselling electric bikes around the country. Whenever you have streets, you have possibilities. And the road reclamations of the last 2 years weren't just emergency actions that will fade away. They will define the way cities look and feel and function for years to come. And it's not a question of engineering or epidemiology. It's a question for all of us of imagination. We know it's still a fight to make space for people. It's a street fight, but it is a fight that we can win and we must win, because when you change the street, you change the world. Thank you. Roberta, I think you're on mute.
There you go. Thank you, Janette. It was terrific. You summed up all the innovations that you led in New York City, which, as often happens, has spread around the world. So I'm curious about something because obviously a lot of us observed this during COVID. Do you think people gained a better appreciation for the streets that had less traffic and more openness, not just to bikers, but to walkers and to even the little traffic that there was moving so much better? So what has COVID done in a positive way to give us a new sensibility about our streets?
Well, I think it changed the status quo of what people expected and what the possibilities were. I think people are used to streets just being the same way forever and ever, in streets around the world. They've worked this way for 60 years, they'll work this way for the next 60 years, and they don't really think about that they can be used any other way. In New York City, I actually think that the status quo has changed. People have a very different expectation for how their streets should be used. They have a new vocabulary of bike share and traffic calming and road diets, terms that they had no idea about before that are now commonplace, that people ask for. And when you think about it, like when I left, we turned our programs into application-based programs. And so it really kind of changed the dynamic. Instead of like government going to communities saying like, how about this project? How about this plaza? How about this bike lane? We asked communities to apply to the New York City Department of Transportation. And the applications were off the charts. People saw it and they wanted it. And the popularity we saw with the latest poll at the end of the administration. And what we've seen in the pandemic is very much the same thing. When I was talking about the article that Seth and I wrote, we did some research and we saw, politicians are winning elections with these type of ambitious changes to the street. And so I don't think you're going to go back to putting the genie back in the bottle. People have seen what's happened. They've seen the 22 miles of reclaimed streets in Milan. They've seen the Champs-Élysées returned to people. They've seen what's happened on the Rue de Rivoli. They've seen car-free light downtown London. I mean, city after city, the people are out and they're enjoying their streets in new ways. And you're not going to be able to turn the clock back on that. And so I think it's really inspiring to see. And I think that is going to be the mark of cities going forward, that we actually have a new dynamic, a new baseline for what makes a great city.
So I agree with you. And I think the evidence is clearly there. These ideas have taken root. They're not you're not putting the genie back in the box. However, one of the strongest lobbies in our country is the automobile lobby. And there's going to be obvious pushback and great promotion for driverless cars, which people don't understand could increase traffic, because if you can summon a car for easy things, you're going to do it 3 times instead of once, and it's going to be a monster. But the car industry is not going away easily. So where do you see that having an impact?
Well, I think we've already seen an impact. I mean, you take a look at the new federal transportation bill, right? The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And what we've seen is, big swath of money allocated directly to cities for the first time, directly for innovative bike lanes and plazas and bus lanes and transit. And, of course, there's still a hill to climb, and there's no question that the car is part of the culture, and we need to start with one street at a time. And I think we're showing that it can work. And, people, you remember back in New York City when we were starting the first ones, back in Dumbo, people in the meatpacking district and in Times Square and Madison Square, people said, it couldn't be done. And today they're, more than 1,000 miles of lanes and more than 70 plazas. So, it keeps building. And I think we're seeing that in city after city. You're seeing this movement. I don't know if you've seen all of the press about what's happening, citizens in Berlin, that want to create car-free downtowns, those plans in Paris, those plans in London, what's happening in Barcelona, what's happening in Tel Aviv, what's happening in Milan. I mean, this is a new road order that is emerging out of the ashes from this car monoculture, that's been there for so long. Cars aren't going away. It's not saying that, cars are going to disappear, but it's saying that there are other uses, there are other mobility strategies that we can build into our streets as we rebuild them. And we're seeing that in dozens of cities, across the nation and in countries around the world.
So I share your optimism, and it's actually optimism based on reality, because what you're saying is absolutely true in terms of it spreading everywhere. But if you look at, which you probably have, the current administration's transportation budget, there is a big chunk of money for the places that want to add lanes to highways, and some of them going through the traditional low-income, often Black communities. It's not going away, but do you get any sense that there's enough pushback in some of these places to not let these ideas keep going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The bill also has money for tear downs of highways, which you would think would not, be the case. There's a huge investments in safety. You're seeing places like Texas, push back, against, the administration and, TxDOT's move to expand the highways in Texas, that's being stopped. That's been stopped by the people, in Houston saying, no more. And so I think that's a huge part of it. And again, evidence that we are moving, however slowly, we are moving to a new strategy. I mean, I'm not sure that anybody would have expected that we would have a federal funding program for tearing down highways. And so it's wonderful actually to have an administration that's talking about that and talking about how they want to see the money used, the federal highway money used for places and states to fix their current infrastructure and highways first before they build new ones. And that fix it first strategy is a critical part, of how we approach our transportation network, moving forward. And, I think it's interesting that, many of the strategies that we pioneered in New York City were, pennies on the infrastructure dollar. It doesn't take a lot of money, to re-engineer these places so that they're people-focused places and spaces.
No, the wonderful thing, just to add to what you're saying, the movement to bring down highways has been accelerating over recent years. And the best part of it is it's reconnecting cities and neighborhoods that were totally divided before. There's no doubt about that. And I'm with you in believing optimistically that the pressure will be strong enough to keep this going. One of our viewers asked, a young person, obviously, where does a young person begin? And I am reminded, I don't know how many decades ago it was, that I asked Jane Jacobs, when will the transportation planner change their attitude? Because back then it was all highway, highway, highway. And she was very pessimistic at the time, because she said the young people were learning the same old tricks from the old professors who believed in highway, highway, highway. Has that culture changed in the schools that are training our new transportation population? And what can young people do to help it along?
Well, I think that the biggest obstacle is thinking that our streets and cities are out of your control, right? And so getting involved at the local level, tactical strategies, that's important. And I find that the best ideas come from young people. I mean, by far, they are imagining new ways of doing things. I'm so inspired by the young designers that I see out there, young minds, fresh ideas. I see more women in transportation. Women bring a very different perspective to transportation. We have new guidance now. I chair an organization called the National Association of City Transportation Officials, NACTO, which actually has rewritten the old rule book on roads. And it used to be this AASHTO green book, which was, 75 years old. There was no people in it anywhere. And it was all about engineering roads so that, cars went as fast as possible from point A to point B. And this new guidance focuses on putting pedestrians at the top of the transportation pyramid and cars at the bottom. And that guidance was adopted by Federal Highway and US DOT. So this is now current guidance that cities and localities can use to redesign their streets. It used to be that places were, planners were reluctant to do that because they were concerned that if it wasn't in the AASHTO, if it didn't follow AASHTO guidelines, you might lose money or you might be, litigated against. And now we have changed that dynamic. And so the last half century has looked at, getting people to offices, and modern transportation is totally different. And we have new strategies and new guidance to help get us there. But I want to underscore how deeply inspired I am from the work that I see in young designers all across the country. It's, incredible.
Well, that's great to hear. You mentioned a different way of looking at transportation by women. How is that so?
Well, if you see the street from the view of caretakers and families, the street looks different. If you're walking across a big street and you have little feet or older feet, it's hard to get across those roadways, right? And so you bring a very different dynamic. Safety is a huge issue. And, not everybody is, a Mad Max, biker or, a driver. So, caretakers take, kids to school and people to medical appointments. And so it's not just about driving from place to place. And I think that's an important, very different lens. Streets should be inviting for people of every age and every ability.
Tell us about the MLK Parkway in Des Moines that was defeated.
The MLK
Highway.
I don't know. I think that's for you.
Oh, well, I thought it was a question that somebody thought you might be able to answer, but here we go with some questions. What are some comments to make to a business owner who does not want to lose a parking space in front of their business?
Well, there is a shorthand, which is that cars don't shop, people do. And we found that when we redesign streets like on 8th and 9th Avenue and put in parking protected bike lanes, it was better for business. And that was the report that I showed, Measuring the Street, which you can find online. And it's very compelling looking at the sales tax revenues from the local businesses along these types of corridors, and showed the increase, 49% increase in sales tax revenues to local businesses along the corridor where we had those parking protected lanes. And part of the thing too is that in a lot of cities, you haven't revisited the parking regulations and spaces for a long time. And we found that we went door to door to talk about the needs of these small businesses, and we were able to provide dedicated delivery zones for those businesses and dedicated parking, which went a long way to helping. So again, so many of our streets haven't been looked at or touched in so long that you can update them to address many, many concerns. And at the end of the process, when we put in these, you would have thought, certainly certain newspapers that you might expect, like one you used to write for, really were rooting for these projects to be a disaster and be eliminated. And what ended up happening was some of our biggest opponents, which were small businesses, turned into our biggest supporters because they saw what happened to their pocketbook, what happened to their bottom line. So I'm a big believer in data. And so when you're working through these issues and you're trying to make these changes and you have very traditional stakeholders that you have to deal with, really focus on looking at the data before and after, because people tend to throw out anecdotes. Oh, parking is worse, traffic is worse. And that used to be the case with us. And then when we had the data, we were actually able to show, no, that's not what happened. And that was a really important way that we overcame some of the criticism.
How can smaller cities develop similar plans of better? Are there ways to monetize these initiatives so that cities can be more motivated to put them in place?
Well, I think it's a question of, you have to have a mayor of these cities that supports this, and having a vision for what you're trying to accomplish is a really important part of this. And I've talked about big cities, but big cities are filled with small spaces. And so these strategies work not only in New York City, but they work anywhere. And, you start with where the people are. Start with your downtown, or start with your main street. Wherever you have people, you have possibilities.
So a lot of the temporary street reclamation projects were easy during the pandemic. And we're already seeing pushback now that things are, not back to normal, but getting there. Do you see, how do you see it holding on? I mean, in New York, we're now debating the sidewalk restaurants, which I thought was one of the more creative things I've seen happen in the city in decades, in their individuality. I don't quite understand where the city council is going with this. Can you explain what that might be? Because I'm sure other cities will follow our path.
Yeah, I mean, the city council is extending, the pilot to make it permanent. And so absolutely, this is continuing here in New York. There's going to be work to do to create standards so that we actually have, safe outdoor dining facilities that respect the needs of pedestrians and people in wheelchairs and people with mobility needs. It does need to grow up, and it does need to come to code. It doesn't need to look like a third world country, and which some of these sheds do. But it is public space, and it needs to benefit the public. And so it's not just for rich people to enjoy their Caesar salads. I think what we're seeing is, the thing that's exciting, and I think that's also not going to go away, is how nimble you can be, how fast you can move to make these changes. And we're going to be coming out with a study that we've been partnering with the New York City Department of Transportation on to measure the economic impact of these open restaurants, to show what it's meant for the bottom line, which I think, again, is going to be another important case to make. And I think will be of use to other cities that are, challenged by these same types of issues and looking to make, their changes permanent.
Does anybody realize how many parking spaces we have lost? I mean, I love your figure of 10,000. I'm sure there are even more. But I don't hear
15,000, 10,000 restaurants and 15,000 parking spaces. No, you don't really want to talk, you talk about taking away a parking space and it's like taking away somebody's firstborn child. You just, don't. So I think, the challenge going forward is how to operationalize these, what happened during the pandemic and make it really work for the long term.
So we have an answer to the MLK Parkway question. It was supposed to be an elevated freeway. Downtown Alliance proposed to stop the project, then offered an alternative and at grade boulevard with signaled intersections, public art and plazas at the intersections. As a result, the area south of the road turned into a very popular residential mixed-use area. I think we've seen this happen. I can remember, I mean, cities that I was writing about 10, 12 years ago were starting to do this. And now everyone from Buffalo to New Orleans is talking about removing a highway, not only divided neighborhoods. Is this, I mean, can we hope that this is a serious trend?
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing that all over. You're seeing the Bonaventure in Montreal. You're seeing the the Embarcadero. We saw what happened there in San Francisco. I mean, fantastic. I think a lot of other cities, more cities should be doing this because, we've seen the proof. It works. We can redesign our infrastructure to make it work better for everyone. And these kinds of examples are inspiring, lots of places, not only in this country, but around the world. So I think it's a great movement.
Here's another question. Address issues.
I can't hear you, Roberta. You're frozen.
How do you address issues of inequality when it comes to where open
You froze. I think Maria was going to jump in if this happened.
Hi. Yeah,
Hi.
I'm here. Hi, everyone. I'm Maria McDonald, the Executive Director of the Center for the Living City. We only have a few minutes left anyway, and I did want to jump in with some more questions. We have Janette, you think you want to take a couple more from the question and answers from the crowd? We have about 5 minutes. I'm trying to find the one
we'll
that.
take a couple more.
Okay, I was trying to find the one that Roberta was on, but I can't find it. Let's see. Ongoing conflicts continue between cars and buses and bicycles and pedestrians within Stanley Park. Are there lessons from Central Park which could be implemented? Do you know what that?
It's always a balancing act, and you can design streets and boulevards and places that work for everyone. It takes time to get everyone together. I mean, one of the issues that I think Roberta was referring to had to do with the inequity, and how do you bring equity into this mix when you are designing open streets? I think that was what she was.
I think so too.
Asking. And there was a lot of lessons that we learned along the way during the pandemic. Even I talked a lot about the opportunity, the once in a lifetime opportunity that was there. And I learned a lot talking to communities in Oakland that didn't look at it like an opportunity. They felt that these open streets and slow streets and neighborhood streets were done unto them, and they weren't part of the process. And so it's critical, and it was a really important point. It's critical that these projects are of the community too, and sourced with the community.
Right.
It's not enough just to look at it as a project. The process itself is the project.
Right.
And I think that's a really important lesson to take away.
Right. So community involvement, open forums, discussions, engagement, participation, like on all levels is critical to the successful implementation of some of these initiatives, right? I mean, I think there are several questions that are rolling through here. We have so many questions. There's almost 20 open questions. I can never get through all of them, but a lot of them have that same thread regarding like how do we do this? One was interesting here. New York is lucky to have a large open data. How do you work within cities and counties or countries which are very difficult with their data? So I love that you said earlier, I wrote in big letters, data. Data is the answer to because we're zooming in from Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is a medium-sized city, and they're very stingy with their parking spaces here, and no one wants to give one up. So where would we go to find the data to go to our council or our mayor's office?
Well, I suggest that you take a look at the, some of the reports that I referenced, and,
Okay.
they're all available online, and they're examples not only in the Measuring the Street report, which is New York City DOT, and, there'll be a new one that's coming out. I think we should have it done within the next 8 weeks or so. You can also find information on that in the book that Seth Solomano and I wrote called Street Fight. And so
Oh,
I
yeah.
encourage you all to get a copy of Street Fight and look at that.
Mhm.
And also NACDO itself, nacdo.org, has got some good information on that. And so, surf around and, you'll be able to, find any number of examples and, can write in with, your specifics. But the short answer is that these projects, they work, they're proven around the world, and, city after city has reclaimed streets. And, the economies of these cities didn't, stop, and
Right.
traffic didn't explode,
Right.
it worked. So, part of it is having the political courage to try it.
Right.
And I'm a big believer in pilot projects, try it, test it out. If it works, you keep it. If it doesn't work, it's not a problem. You can always put it back to the way that it was before.
Pilot project, really good advice as well. Yep. The very last question will just be, how do you address the city council that thinks they get money from parking meters and parking lots? It's data. It's just going to be more data, right? I mean, how do they think that parking lots and parking meters give them revenue for the city? So then we just have to combat that with different data.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and yeah, parking is cheap in so many places. It's not actually a huge moneymaker, but
Right.
that's for another day. So,
Well, so
I
we
want
are.
to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Are you kidding? Thank you for this incredible, inspirational, motivational. I feel like we're ready to take it to the street now. I love this. I love Cars Don't Shop. People do. I mean, so many wonderful streets and the possibilities that are open to us. It's a really wonderful way for us to expand our thought about our cities and inspiring a new generation that's largely on this call today, that they can move forward and make positive changes in their communities. Thank you, Roberta. I don't know if she's frozen for good. She did a wonderful job. Thank you so much. Seth, behind the scenes, Roberta, yes, thank you.
And keep fighting.
We will. We will.
Okay.
The last thing I need to say is that I invite everyone to please join us for our next Jane Jacobs lecture, which will be March 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern again. And that one is expanding the field of architecture, women in practice across the globe. So that's going to be a really interesting talk about women designed projects, women led initiatives. And we look forward to having everyone back then. Janette Sadik-Khan, thank you. Seth, behind there, thank you. Roberta, thank you. Everyone, thank you for joining the Center for the Living City. Bye-bye.